What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. We're going to get into breaking down the fights for UFC Fight Night Mexico City soon, but before we do, I want to talk to you about a problem I've been having. So you might have noticed that I haven't uploaded any breakdown videos to YouTube for a few weeks now, and that hasn't been because I haven't been trying. If you look at my YouTube studio here, you can see 5 different notifications for videos that are blocked. You can see one for Brady Edwards, another one for Brady Edwards, another one for Brady Edwards, Dolidze Vettori, and what's basically happening is I keep uploading my breakdown videos just like I always do, but they keep getting copyright flagged, which is why there haven't been any uploaded in recent weeks. So you guys, you've been watching my videos for a long time, you've been watching my channel for a long time. What I like to do is when I make, these breakdowns and I talk about the strengths and weaknesses between the two fighters, I like to show fight footage to back up the points that I'm making, because the footage doesn't lie, right? If I say Alex Pereira's wrestling is bad, how do you know that you can trust me that Alex Pereira's wrestling is bad if I don't show you footage of it, right? So I like to include a lot of footage, and for whatever reason, over the last few weeks, all my videos have just been getting blocked because of the footage I've included, when in the past it wasn't a problem. You can see in the last few weeks so many videos have been blocked. This one was blocked, this one was blocked, blocked. You can see I tried to upload a breakdown video for the Vettori Dolidze card 3 times, tried to do it for Edwards Brady twice, and it just gets to a point where, like, I'll upload a video and then YouTube will tell me you've got to remove this bit of footage. So I'll go away, I'll edit the video, I'll remove that bit of footage, re-upload it, and then it'll say, oh yeah, and you've got to upload another, you've got to remove another bit of footage as well. So when you upload it the first time and it gets copyright flagged, it doesn't tell you everything wrong with it. It only tells you one thing that's wrong with it. And then when you upload it again, it'll tell you another thing, and it just gets to a point where you either have to have like no footage in it, or spend ages uploading, editing, re-uploading, editing, re-uploading, until YouTube's happy with the shit that you've put out. So it's super annoying, because I should be able to use this footage legally under obviously fair use copyright law, but you can't get past the YouTube copyright algorithm. It's a nightmare. So sorry that there haven't been any uploads in recent weeks, but it's getting really difficult to upload videos to YouTube using UFC fight footage. And I really don't want to go and just not put footage in videos anymore, because I feel like it's really important, like it adds a lot to them. So I don't just want to say, oh, I'm just going to do videos without footage, because then they'd be even more boring than they probably already are. Seems a bit shit, but then I haven't got time every week to be editing the same video 3, 4, 5 times, because, like, for example, the Brady Edwards breakdown video was like 20 gigabytes big in file size. So the process of uploading, editing, re-uploading, like, it takes probably like 2-3 hours per upload. Uploading, editing, processing, resaving, fucking nightmare. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. As ever though, you guys know by now, I upload breakdown videos for every single UFC fight on every single UFC card to my website. So even though there were no breakdown videos on YouTube over the last few weeks, I have put breakdown videos on my website for every single fight every week. Like, we can look at the breakdown videos page for Edwards versus Brady last week, and you can see here breakdown videos for every single fight on the card, including fights like Nelson versus Holland, Edwards Brady, with loads of fight footage, completely uncensored. So I'm not going to stop uploading videos to my website that contains fight footage, because under copyright law I can do that. Fair use copyright law, I can do that. I'm creating a completely new piece of work, providing commentary and analysis, and it's not like I'm uploading entire UFC fights, I'm just chopping up little bits. So YouTube's just aggressive with the copyright algorithm. So yeah, if ever there's no YouTube video, you can watch the breakdowns on my website. You can sign up, join my website. And I don't know what I'm going to do about YouTube. Maybe this video will get flagged, and maybe this won't even go up. We'll see what happens. It'll be like the third consecutive week with no video. But anyway, enough about that. I just wanted to let you guys know so that you weren't wondering where I've been. So, what I also want to do is let you guys know about live betting with me. Obviously, I'm the best in the world at this shit. Been doing it since 2016. Actually, I've been doing it a lot longer, but I started my website and tracking my results in 2016. We make a profit on around 70% of events. Obviously, percentages change all the time as we get more events. I think the current percentage is like 68 point something. So if you watch every UFC event live, it's an absolute no-brainer to live bet with me because we make a profit most weeks. So even though you pay a subscription fee, you'll always make a lot more than that back from the bets. And if you want to see what it's like, I'm going to drop a clip now of a recent bet we won on the fight between Roman Dolidze and Marvin Vettori. I would love to include footage of the fight so that you could actually see like my commentary and my rationale and thought process for the live bet correlating with the footage you see in front of you, but because of copyrights I'm probably going to have to blur that out. Anyway, check it out, and this is exactly what you could expect if you join my live betting group. You join my Discord and you'll listen to an audio stream as the fight's taking place, where I'm talking you through the fight from a betting point of view, my strategy, my approach, my thought process to live betting that fight. And then when a live bet emerges, we pull the trigger, and like I say, we make a profit on 70% of UFC events, and we do very, very well over the long term. So here is our bet from very, very recently on the Dolidze versus Vettori fight. Alright guys, we are back for the next one. Really good main event this. Roman Dolidze, Marvin Vettori. So hopefully we can end the night on a high, snipe a profit, snipe a winner on this final fight. We did it last week. We sniped our win on Ankalaev in the final fight of the night. And if we can bank a profit tonight, this will be our third winning event in a row. Obviously, we hit the winner on Sam Hughes earlier on, but it would be nice to hit another one and go 2-0 on the night. So this could be a really good fight for live betting because it's a rematch. Vettori fought Dolidze 2 fights ago, and I don't think much has changed since they last fought. So with their last fight very fresh in our memory, we've got a real good idea as to how this one is likely to go, which is good news for us. And I do have quite a clear live betting strategy for this one. So where do we begin? So we should focus heavily on their first fight because, like I say, Vettori's only fought once since then. And their first fight gives us strong clues as to how this one is likely to play out. So their first fight was razor close. If you look at the media scores for that fight, even though Vettori won a unanimous decision, it was split dead even 50-50. Half the MMA media scored the fight for Dolidze, half the MMA media scored the fight for Vettori. I watched the fight back this week, obviously. It was very close. I scored the fight for Dolidze live at the time when we were live betting it, and watching the fight back in the cold light of day this week, I again scored it for Dolidze. So let's go through how they match up stylistically, what could have changed since their last fight, and then let's talk about how this one's likely to go. So Dolidze is now 36 years old, and I wouldn't expect him to look any different from their last fight because obviously Dolidze is quite old now. Father Time's undefeated. He's going to be 37 years old later this year. And, while I wouldn't necessarily expect Dolidze to be looking worse than their first fight, he's certainly not going to be looking any better. There is scope for Vettori to have improved a lot, though. So we haven't seen him for 2 years. When he last fought Dolidze, he was 29. He's now 31 years old. If you spend 2 years dedicating your life to improving at anything, you're going to be a lot better at it after 2 years. Doesn't matter if it's go-karting, knitting, playing Call of Duty. Doesn't matter what it is. Fucking painting, driving cars, cage fighting. You're going to be better at it. So Vittori's had 2 years to improve since their last fight, or over 2 years. We haven't seen him for 2 years. And so it's very possible Vittori looks a lot better than he did when we last saw him. Having said that, Vittori has been in the UFC since his early 20s. I think he made his debut at 23. And in the last few years, so over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, he didn't really improve at all. However, something to consider, Marvin Vittori, since making his UFC debut, for the most part, trained at King's MMA under Rafael Cordero. In the last 2 years, he's moved to train full time at American Top Team, which is the best gym in the world. You see Mike Brown in his corner. And we often see fighters make huge improvements when they move to American Top Team. I think Grant Dawson is probably one of the best recent examples we've got. Grant Dawson was absolutely terrible before he moved to American Top Team. And now look at him. Dawson's one of the most formidable grapplers in the UFC. So big things can happen when you go to a gym like ATT. Big improvements can happen. And Vittori already had a very, very solid base to work from. He's got incredible cardio, tough as nails, very good grappling, very durable, great chin. He's got a solid base of skills. He's difficult to take down. He's well-rounded. He's a he's a very nice blank canvas for ATT to work on. So what we need to do now is talk about how their first fight played out, and then we need to talk about a live betting strategy for this one. So their first fight basically played out with Vittori on the outside and Dolidze holding the center of the octagon. And both guys landed a similar volume of strikes, but Vittori just edged him in volume from the outside. But what was very notable when you watch the first fight is that Vittori just couldn't hurt Dolidze on the feet. So Vittori would land clean, hard shots, and Dolidze would just smile, eat everything Vittori threw at him, and keep coming forward. But when Dolidze would land on Vittori, I'm not going to say he necessarily hurt Vittori, but the impactfulness of the shots would be far greater. And when he would land clean and hard on Vittori, Vittori would go flying backwards. And so that's for me why Dolidze won their first fight. Vittori edged him in volume, but in terms of damage and power and impactfulness, which is what we should be scoring on, Dolidze took it. So I would expect this fight to play out in pretty much the same way, because even though Vittori has gone to train at American Top Team, he's not going to have developed any extra power, or at least pretty unlikely he would have developed any extra power. So unless Vittori comes in with a completely different game plan and strategy, fight's probably going to go very similar to how we did last time and be very razor close and probably end up going to a split decision. We all end up arguing who won the fight at the end of it. However, there is one area where Vittori has an enormous advantage, and that is on the ground. Marvin Vittori is an excellent MMA grappler. Good offensive wrestling, very heavy top control, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Vittori is very, very aware of position over submission. Vittori is a very sound and solid grappler. You very rarely see him use grappling, but then we very rarely saw Alexander Hernandez use grappling before tonight, and he grappled his little dick off in round 2 and 3 against Kurt Holloway. So we know Vittori has a gigantic advantage on the ground against Dolidze. Dolidze is a very, very, very low-level grappler. And a lot of people would disagree with me on that because he's got a few funky, weird submissions out of nowhere. But Dolidze's MMA grappling is trash. And if these two get into grappling exchanges and grappling positions, Vittori dominates, I can assure you of that. So with Vittori now going to train at American Top Team, he's got a better team of coaches behind him. And maybe he comes into this fight with a game plan and strategy tailored towards beating Dolidze. So if I was Mike Brown, if I was Vittori's coach, what would I be saying to Vittori? How would I coach him to beating Dolidze? Well, I would look at their first fight and I would go, Vittori can't really hurt Dolidze on the feet. He doesn't have the power. Now, what do we know about the way these two match up? Well, we know Vittori has a much better gas tank than Dolidze, and he's a much better grappler. So let's just force Dolidze to grapple, wear him out, and while you may find it difficult to take him down early, if you tire Dolidze out, he should be very easy to take down and hold down in the second half of the fight. If I was Vittori's coach, I would be telling him, grapple your little Italian dick off, because you're way better than this guy on the ground. And even if you can't get him down early, you'll put money in the bank later in the fight, because Delidze will be too tired to defend the takedowns in rounds 3, 4, and 5. If you drive him into the cage, wear on him in the clinch, beat him up a bit. That's what I would be saying to Vittori. But, I don't know if that's what his game plan is, but that's how he can win tonight. So what's the strategy for betting this fight? Well, I would not bet Delidze before at least the third round. We've seen him in a 5-rounder against Imavov where he slowed a lot. And there are many examples throughout Delidze's career where he slowed bad in fights. The Trevin Giles fight is another good example. He doesn't always slow, but he quite often slows. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Whenever guys have got big abnormal power, that usually comes at a cost, and their cardio ain't the best. Delidze suffers from that. It's always a trade-off. Vittori has amazing cardio, but the trade-off for Vittori is that he doesn't have any power to hurt his opponent. He's got a bad case of pillow fists. So Delidze, garbage cardio, big power. Vittori, garbage power, big cardio. Right? They're the opposite of one another. So I would not live bet Delidze until at least the third round here. You want to at least see how he looks in round 3, so that you've got light at the end of the tunnel and you can start to visualize how tired he looks in the third and how capable he's going to be of performing at a decent level in rounds 4 and 5. So we will not be, we may live bet Delidze here, but it won't be before round 3. With Vittori, way more open-minded to live betting him early, because we know the longer the fight goes, the worse Delidze is going to get. Whereas Vittori can fight pretty consistently for 5 rounds. We've seen him in multiple 5-rounders. His cardio's held up just great. So what we're looking for here is paying close attention to how much energy Delidze is exerting. We're also paying close attention to whether Vittori shows any willingness to grapple. And something else we need to pay attention to is how does Vittori hold up in the striking exchanges? Because if Vittori starts to do something different and outstrike Delidze in the early rounds, he is going to be a very good bet, because we know Delidze is only getting worse in rounds 3, 4, and 5. So we're paying close attention to this one. We know a lot about both these guys. We've been blessed with seeing them fight before. Got a lot of information to work with. Hopefully we can use that information to make some money here. But at the moment, this fight is playing out exactly like the first, where every time Delidze lands on Vittori, it doesn't matter if he lands clean or not, the difference in power is huge, and we're seeing Vittori fly backward. So the power difference between these two is stark. I mean, look at that. Delidze lands a clubbing overhand right to the arms of Vittori, and Vittori goes flying back. But remember, there's almost always a trade-off. You do get the unicorns in MMA from time to time that have got big power and great cardio, but it's fucking rare. Usually you have one or the other. Usually you're very powerful and physically imposing, or you have great cardio. It's rare you get a guy with both. When you do get a guy with both, they're often world champions or in that world champion picture, right? These two are the opposites of one another, and you can really see it early. But we know all these big winging hooks that Delidze throws, they come at a cost, because they do use up a lot of energy. But early on, there is no doubt that Delidze is winning this fight, because Vittori just cannot trouble him on the feet. But remember, 25 minutes is a long time. It's just crazy, though, how Delidze can literally land on the fucking arms or shoulders of Vittori, and Vittori still goes flying backward. It's crazy, like, the difference in power between these two. Like Delidze can just walk him down and have nothing to worry about. Like in their first fight, Delidze was just walking forward, smiling. Like this is pretty much exactly how their first fight went, which is wild, because the judges scored the fight for Vittori, and half the MMA media scored it for Vittori as well. But you all know how I feel about how the MMA media score fights. I think half the time they're playing fucking Candy Crush on their phones and eating pizza. And what is good at the moment for Delidze is he's not really having to burn through much energy. Vittori isn't making him work that hard. Delidze's just throwing the odd single shot, backing Vittori up. Delidze hasn't got to do a whole lot here, and he's winning the round pretty comfortable. So remember, Delidze will slow as the fight progresses, but you still have to make him work hard. He's probably going to be able to fight at a decent pace for 5 rounds if he ain't burning too much energy like this. If I was in Vittori's corner, I would just say, drive him into the cage, beat him up in the clinch a little bit, wear on him, tire him out. You know, I don't understand how after a 2-year layoff, Vittori just thinks he's going to come in and do the fucking same thing again and hope that the judges get it wrong again. So 40 seconds left to go. Look, this is a close round visually. Like, visually, it's a close round. Neither guy is really achieving a lot. It is a close round. But Delidze is winning this round, in my opinion. Call me crazy. It ain't pretty. It's big, sluggish, slow, single shots. But it's more than what Vittori's doing. But then in round, you know, at the end of the day, I will say this. This is a very visually close round. And when you've got a judge, Eric Colon, that scored that fight 30-27 Alexander Hernandez when the correct scorecard was 29-28 Holloway. I mean, I don't think anyone here can be confident how that round will be scored. How did I score it? Delidze. I scored it for Delidze. He had Vittori on the back foot, you know, landing harder shots. And I will say this. The way that fights are supposed to be scored, you score primarily on effective striking and grappling. Only if you cannot determine a winner of a round based on effective striking and grappling do you then consider aggression, right? I feel this is actually one of those rare examples where you could actually score that round for Delidze based on aggression because the striking was so even. Vittori probably had a little bit more volume, but Delidze landed harder. Very difficult to distinguish a winner in terms of effective striking. So I feel there you can actually go to scoring the round based on aggression. And that was, you know, Delidze was the aggressor. He was the guy coming forward. So let me know how you guys score that round. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's pretty pointless how we score it. It's pretty pointless. It's totally irrelevant because at the end of the day, the round was so close. It doesn't really matter how it should be scored or how we scored it. We know the judges will just fucking write some random numbers on a piece of paper and that round could go to anyone, if we're being honest. It was that close. Absolutely could go to anyone. So, fuck it. No point in even thinking about it. We'll keep an open mind on round one. Oh, spinning, fucking. It wasn't even a spin. It was like a fucking back slap. Up elbow. Delidze throwing some crazy shit here. It's not landing particularly clean, but trying some funky, goofy stuff. Oh, he's looking for the Shara double elbow things. He wants the 50k. He should just focus on punching Vittori in the face, to be honest. He's missed wide on everything. Delidze is just terrible. He's one of those very bad fighters that just somehow has managed to get by on toughness and power. But he's awful, man. So bad. Like, it's possible Vittori puts it on him in rounds 4 and 5 if Delidze slows, but the thing is, it's not a particularly high pace. You know? It's not like Delidze is having to burn through tons of energy here, which is a huge tactical error of Vittori. You know, Vittori's biggest weapon in this fight was his gas tank. He should have come out in the first and really put it on Delidze and made him work, but instead, he's trying to win a point fighting contest. He's letting Delidze be very comfortable here. You know, this guy's got bad cardio. Make him pay for it. What I do think Vittori's done a good job of is finishing both the first and second strong. He's picked it up towards the end of both rounds, whereas Delidze's eased off a little bit. Immediate impact outweighs cumulative effect. But it's not convincing. It's very rare you'll hear me say this, but I have no idea who is winning this fight. It could be Vittori could be up 2, Delidze could be up 2. It could be 1 round apiece. It's just so close. I've no idea. I've no idea. Absolutely no idea. Like, if you're asking me how I scored the rounds, I would go round 1 Delidze based on aggression. I would go round 2 Vittori because I do think he landed more volume than Delidze in round 2. Oh, big left hand from Vittori. Delidze changes levels. Oh wow, Vittori, Delidze's hurt. Delidze's wobbled here. Delidze's wobbled. Looks like he's recovered though. Looks like he's recovered. Vittori went in for the kill, didn't get the kill. And it looks like Delidze's got his legs back under him and he's recovered here. Remember, Delidze was also wobbled in the 5-rounder against Imavov. Vittori, not a guy known for his power. Vittori's never been knocked out. It's interesting. So that's the only notable thing that happened in this fight so far. Everything else been razor close. Vittori now a big favourite based on him hurting Delidze on the feet, but that might not mean anything if Delidze's up 2 rounds, which he could be. Vittori's mouth open wide. Oh, Delidze just literally spamming head kicks. It's not the smartest decision from Delidze, to be honest, because this round is probably lost. And so those head kicks are going to take a lot of energy. He would have been much better off using them in round 4 instead. Because obviously if he wins the 4th, or if he uses them to win the 4th, it's a worthy investment rather than trying to chase around here where he's probably going to need a knockdown in order to take this round. Vittori's looking tired here though, boys. We do see improbable things happen from time to time in the UFC. Remember, was it Haider? Who was it? Haider. Recently, Haider fought William Gomez. We were saying his cardio is terrible, and then he literally put it on Gomez for 3 rounds, didn't slow down at all. So every once in a while, you see something crazy and improbable happen. Is Vittori the cardio machine slowing here, and is the gassy fighter Delidze going to finish stronger? Clubbing right hand from Delidze. Is this also going to be one of those rounds which is difficult to score because Vittori had one moment where he wobbled Delidze, but outside of that, Delidze's outstruck him clear. So every round of this fight is very difficult to score. Round 1, razor close. Round 2, razor close. Round 3, Delidze won round 3 big, outside of him getting wobbled. So do the judges score round 3 based on the wobble, or the fact that Delidze outstruck Vittori by a big margin in round 3? Very difficult fight to score. But I will say this, Vittori's looking tired. Vittori is looking tired, which is very unusual because Vittori is usually a cardio machine and Delidze is the guy that slows. But like we say, you see some crazy unpredictable shit in MMA, and maybe the opposite of what would logically happen is going to play out here, where Delidze, his cardio holds up all right and Vittori fades. Maybe that's what we get here. With that, guys, I am going to recommend a 1-unit bet on Delidze at odds of 1.66. That's 1 unit Delidze, 1.66. 1 unit Delidze, 1.66. 1 unit Delidze, 1.66. His odds are far better on some other sites, but we'll say official odds 1.66. The reason why I like Delidze here is because Vittori is looking exhausted and Delidze is now clearly outstriking him. And Delidze is also showing no signs of slowing down. What we've seen a lot in recent weeks is fighters that show tired body language have been punished by the judges. And for me, Delidze looks like he's in a real strong position here to win rounds 4 and 5 with how tired Vittori is looking. And so with rounds 1 and 2 being so close, if Delidze can win rounds 4 and 5, if the judges just give him one of the first or the second, very likely he will win a decision here. And personally, I had the first 2 rounds, 1 round apiece. Delidze is definitely winning this round. We're starting to see Vittori with visible damage on his face. But yeah, very nice odds on Delidze on some sites. But yeah, I have a feeling. Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. Oh, spinning elbow from Delidze. what I was going to say was it should be 1 round apiece after the first 2 rounds. It's not impossible. It's not impossible that Delidze won the third round because even though he got wobbled, he did outstrike Vittori by a wide margin in round 3. It's not impossible. Sometimes judges disregard that one big moment in favor of volume. Not always. So scorecards could be all over the place here, but Delidze should take round 4. Delidze won round 4 pretty clear in my opinion. Round 1 and 2, very, very difficult to score. Round 1 and 2 could go either way. Round 3 should go Vittori, but not impossible. Delidze takes round 3. So what we're hoping for here is that Delidze can win the 5th round with Vittori looking quite tired. And if Delidze can win the 5th round, he only would need to win one of the first 3 in order to take a decision, because Delidze should definitely take round 4. So hopefully, Delidze can put us 2-0 on UFC for the day, which would put us 5-1 overall if you include the football bets from earlier. And we've still got tons of football after this event as well. Come on, Delidze, get this over the line for us. Obviously, we cannot forget that scorecards could be all over the place here. The first 2 rounds were razor close. And so, it's possible Vittori's up 3 rounds to 1. It is possible. It's not impossible. It's just improbable. It's improbable. You can make a case for Delidze winning the first 2. He definitely won the 4th. He could have won the 3rd. Remember, after Vittori hurt Delidze in round 3, he looked very tired and then got outstruck by a wide margin for the remainder of the round. So it's not impossible that Delidze won round 3. Both guys going toe-to-toe now, exchanging big shots. Vittori fighting with a sense of urgency. Vittori's come out hard at the beginning of this round after looking tired earlier in the fight. Does that mean he'll fade in the second half of this round? But Vittori came out the gate very hard in this round, and now he looks tired again. It's an interesting tactic. Both guys wearing a lot of visible damage on their face. Delidze probably bleeding more. Head kick from Delidze. Tired body language has been punished, though, in recent weeks. And Vittori obviously looking tired. The more tired out of the two. Delidze the aggressor. Head kick from Delidze. Midway point of the round now. Both guys had a little break there midway through the round. Well, not midway through. It's almost at the end of the round. 1:20 left to go in the round. Delidze winning this round, outstriking Marvin Vittori by a good margin here. So we placed this bet based on the fact that Delidze looked like he was going to win rounds 4 and 5 with Vittori fading, and then hoping that the judges would give Delidze either the first or second, which would mean he would win the fight 3 rounds to 2. Hopefully that logic plays out. Hopefully our read on the fight is correct, and hopefully we can go 2-0 on the UFC tonight, thanks to Sam Hughes and Roman Delidze. I think Vittori is trying to get a point deduction here for Delidze because he knows he's behind. Thankfully, Herb Dean's not falling for it. 40 seconds left to go. Delidze has won the 4th clear. He's currently winning the 5th clear. Can he put his stamp on the round? All right, boys. So our read on this fight was correct. We placed the bet on the fight on the basis, or we placed the bet on Delidze on the basis that he was very likely to win rounds 4 and 5. Delidze did win rounds 4 and 5, clear as day, in my opinion. Now, it's not impossible that Vittori is, up 3 rounds to none going into round 4, in which case we'd be drawing dead because Delidze would obviously need a finish in that instance in order to win. But rounds 1 and 2 were extremely close. The probability of the judges scoring both the first 2 rounds for Vittori, I feel, is unlikely. So what we're hoping for here is that the judges, 2 of the 3 judges, give Delidze one of the first 2 rounds. And if they score rounds 4 and 5 correctly, which they should because they were pretty clear rounds for Delidze, we should get the win here. Hopefully we go 2-0 here, extend our winning run to 3 consecutive winning events, and I'm really, really hoping that really hoping we can go 5-1 on a day, boys, 3-1 on football, And this would be 2-0 on the UFC, thanks to Sam Hughes earlier on and Mr. Delidze. If the judges do their job, let me know how you scored the fight, boys. But there should be at least 3 rounds to 2, Delidze. Should be at least 3 rounds to 2. It'd be very disappointing if we do not get a winner here. Judges, do your job. Say that man's name, please. Come on, judges. It's unanimous or someone. Oh, boys. There we go. Feels like old times, man. Nice and easy. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. We are betting excellently in football, boys. And it just feels like old times in the UFC. Just grinding wins, moving the chains, sniping the wins, predicting the fights correctly. The judges doing their job. Just drama-free shit. So, boys, feels great to go 2-0 on the UFC. I'm already looking forward to next week's card, that daytime card in London. But I have to rush off now, boys, because we got tons of MLS and Mexican football to bet. And so we got more work to do. The job ain't done yet. So that was the audio from the recent live bet that we won on Roman Dolidze to beat Marvin Vettori. And I'm sure that I'll have more winning bets to share with you in next week's breakdown video from bets we win this weekend at UFC Mexico City, because we tend to do extremely well on events in Mexico, particularly events that are fight night cards. So looking forward to this weekend. We've made a profit on the last 4 consecutive UFC events, and I'm hoping to make it 5 winning events in a row this weekend. I'm very, 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 very confident I'll make a profit in live betting this weekend. So check it out, because you won't regret it. It's fantastic. You will fall in love with it. So now let's turn our attention to breaking down some fights. And we'll kick things off by breaking down the main event between Steve Erceg and Brandon Moreno. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Steve Erceg is a decent sized underdog at average odds of about 2.90, which is going to be plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. If we take a look at the odds on Moreno, he's going to be around an average of 1.42, which is going to be minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. So Moreno is 31 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach, and Erceg is 29 years old, 5'8", with a 68.5-inch reach. So we can see that both guys about the same age, about the same size, nothing too major going on there. There is a big X factor to take into consideration on this fight though, and that is that this fight is taking place in Mexico City, which means not only does Brandon Moreno have home advantage in the sense that the crowd are going to be behind him, which can influence the judges, and the crowd can obviously give him a lift if times get tough in the fight, and you know, they could potentially demoralize Steve Erceg if they're really getting on his back and giving Moreno tons of support. But we know that in Mexico City is very high above sea level, so the fighters this weekend are going to have to battle with the high altitude climate, which can obviously wreak havoc on a fighter's gas tank and cardio. And I would expect a lot of fighters to be gassing out this weekend. Now, many fighters will go out to Mexico City to try and climatize to the high altitude. They will sleep in altitude chambers and things like that over the last few months. But from my experience, nothing can really prepare you for it. And some guys just deal well with it and others don't. So in the case of Brandon Moreno, he's fought in Mexico City many times. He's got a lot of experience with it. Erceg has no experience. So this is going to be a big advantage for Moreno this weekend. And even though Erceg has really good cardio, we've never seen him slow down. And his cardio obviously looked great in that 5-rounder against Pantoja. Over the years, we've seen a lot of fighters who have great cardio really struggle in high altitude climates. So that's something to think about as a risk factor with betting Erceg this weekend. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, Brandon Moreno's an interesting guy because he's still very young. I know he's had a lot of fights for his age. 32 pro fights for a 31-year-old is a lot. Moreno's also one of these guys that's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of damage. But he's an interesting case because I feel that he's actually declining when he's in his prime and he should still be improving. So with how much experience he's got, the fact that he's so well-rounded, so tough, so durable, such a great gas tank, I expect so much more from Moreno than what we get. And if you look at his record, you can see that he just frequently gets involved in very close fights. There was a split decision here with Askar Askarov. There was a majority decision here with Davison Figueiredo. And 2 of his last 3 have gone to a split decision. In last week's breakdown video for the fight between Nathaniel Wood and Morgan Charrier, we went through Charrier's record and we found that any time in his career that one of his fights had gone the distance, the fight had gone to a split or majority decision. When you see a fighter like Moreno or like a Charrier that goes to a split decision or a majority decision much more than your average, that often says a lot about the mentality of a fighter. So George St. Pierre famously said that fighting was 90% mental. And, an attribute or a trait of some fighters that we see from time to time is that you do get some fighters which struggle to put their stamp on rounds. And they're a little bit passive and a little bit tentative. And they're overly tactical, overly strategic. And they don't really go out there during a lot of rounds and beat their opponent beyond all reasonable doubt. And I feel that's certainly what we are seeing in Brandon Moreno over the last few years. I feel that when he was on the come up, working his way towards that title picture, he was aggressive, he fought at a high pace, he often peppered his opponents with jabs and leg kicks and mixed up his striking and grappling well. But once he won the title, he became overly tactical to the extent that he was just very passive, very tentative. He held back a lot. He would try and outpoint guys instead of overwhelming them with the pace and the volume and the work rate that made him so great to begin with and enabled him to win the title. And the Brandon Moreno fight is a great example of this because he holds back so much in the Royval fight when we know Moreno is capable of fighting at a far higher pace with far higher volume. So for me, Moreno is a very difficult fighter to trust at this stage in his career because, when you consider his odds, they carry an implied probability of 70%. In order to find any value on Moreno at all, you've got to be giving him like a 75 to 80% chance of winning, which is obviously very, very difficult to do in a cage fight to the death, in a sport as chaotic and random as MMA, especially when you're facing, a pretty well-rounded, pretty skilled opponent like Erceg. So when we break down fights like this, it can be difficult. It's like breaking down a Kevin Holland fight, right? What version of Kevin Holland is going to show up, right? The Kevin Holland that fights Derek Brunson or Marvin Vettori and gets taken down easily and absolutely dominated on the ground, or the Kevin Holland that fought, Derrida and, Chimaev and all these other guys that have taken him down so easily and submitted him so easily? Or are you going to get the version of Kevin Holland we saw last weekend that is all of a sudden going to look very difficult to take down and hold down? You never know what version of fighters you're going to get, and some are more inconsistent than others. And I would put Brandon Moreno into that box of fighters that are very, very inconsistent. And you do not want to be betting fighters in this odds range that are inconsistent, because on any given night, they could just show up, not fight for your money, they could underperform. And obviously you need to win a lot of bets in this odds range and maintain a very high win rate just to break even. You've got to win 70% of bets in this odds range just to break even. So it's not an easy path to walk trying to be profitable betting on guys in this odds range. And for me, even with home advantage and experience and the experience of fighting at high altitude, it's very dangerous to bet Moreno this weekend. Having said that, this is a good stylistic matchup for him, because if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, we know that Moreno is not only better than Erceg, but he just has tons of other advantages too. So if we think about how these two match up stylistically, we know that Moreno is a good MMA grappler. Yes, he's primarily a striker, but he can grapple too. Doesn't have the best grappling control, but what he does have is good enough cardio to spam grappling and spam takedowns for 5 rounds. We saw Erceg repeatedly taken down against Pantoja, and while Moreno doesn't have the grappling control, the BJJ, the wrestling, or the physicality of Pantoja, he does have the ability to be more relentless than Pantoja because his cardio is so much better. So with Erceg repeatedly giving up cheap takedowns against Pantoja last weekend, not last weekend in his title fight, if Moreno wants to grapple in this fight, and he often doesn't, but if he wants to, that's a clear and obvious path to victory for him. Now, when it comes to striking, it's very, very difficult to beat Moreno when he shows up and performs to his best because he's so tough and so durable, and his gas tank is so good that when he gets his jabs and his leg kicks going, it's just so hard to match his volume because he's relentless. He fights at such a high pace. And while Erceg is a good striker with good boxing, he just won't be able to match that kind of volume that Moreno can put on him. So when you look at how these two match up stylistically, Moreno's the better grappler, the better striker, he's more durable, he has better cardio, and he has home advantage and the experience of fighting in Mexico City at high altitude in the past. So he's got an insane amount of advantages over Erceg, which is why he's a pretty big favourite and commands an implied probability of 70%. But the problem is I feel his advantages are baked into the odds. It's very difficult to find any value on Moreno due to the inconsistent nature of his past performances, particularly over the last few years where he's a lot more tactical and strategic and nowhere as aggressive or nowhere near as aggressive as he used to be when he was on the come up, which is a shame because when Moreno's at his best and fighting aggressively, he's a pleasure to watch and by far the best fighter in this division by a mile. All these other guys, Pantoja, Manel Cap, Steve Erceg, they don't stand a chance of beating Moreno when he's at his best. The problem is these days he's quite often not at his best for whatever reason. Fighting is 90% mental. That's an area where Moreno is pretty weak in 2025. So, it's one of those fights, and I say this quite often, it is a great fight for live betting because when you do have these guys like Brandon Moreno that are very passive and very tentative, it's quite rare that they'll just go out there and absolutely dominate and put it on their opponent for 25 minutes, especially against someone as good as Steve Erceg. So if you're patient with this one and you want to bet Moreno, you will likely get better odds on him if you wait live than having to take 1.42, an implied probability of 70%. You will probably get better odds because at some point in this fight, Moreno will probably take a round off or fuck about or give up a cheap takedown at a bad time, and will in some way make the fight closer than it needed to be because of how often this guy gets drawn into close fights. I mean, I don't think that Erceg is any worse than Brandon Royval. And yet, Royval was able to beat Moreno by split decision. That should have been an easy fight for Moreno. He made it hard for himself. So look, Moreno might show up this weekend, bang up for it, crowd behind him, Mexico City, all that sort of stuff. Might look better than ever. But guys like this are difficult to trust. Once a fighter is inconsistent, you can never trust them again because it's a weakness in them that can always rear its ugly head. So it's a good one for live betting. We've got a good chance of making money on this one in live betting, but no interest in betting it pre-fight because the odds on Moreno are too steep and Erceg is second best everywhere, so I've got no interest in betting him. If we look at the odds on the over-under, we can see that the odds heavily favour the fight going deep. From a risk to reward point of view, I would say there's no upside in betting this fight to go to a decision. Will it most likely go to a decision? Yes. Erceg frequently fights to decisions. Moreno is a bit of a decisionator. But what I would say is even though they're both very tough and well-rounded, it is the first time that Erceg's ever fought at high altitude. He was KO'd by Kai Kara France, so that's a bit of a red flag. It shows he's not totally bulletproof. You know, I think the odds on this fight not going to a decision give you a better risk to reward ratio at dog odds, rather than paying steep favourite odds on it to go to a decision. But I won't be betting either. It's just my personal opinion on the over. And the only prop I would consider would be Moreno by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible. Although I suppose better than money line, but still terrible. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. So now let's break down the co-main event. Bit of a strange co-main event. It's a great fight, but it's two fighters that you wouldn't expect to be in a co-main event position. Manuel Torres lost his last fight. You know, Dober, not exactly a huge name on a two-fight losing streak, but I think this matchup, the fact this is a co-main event, kind of summarises where the UFC is at the moment. It's not what it used to be. Please will someone make UFC great again. So anyway, Dober is the slight favourite at average odds of about, call it 1.90. In fact, I was going to say, no, okay. They're both about the same odds, right? If you shop around. So we'll say both of them about 1.91, which is going to be minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So Manuel Torres is 30 years old, 5'10" with a 73-inch reach. Drew Dober, 36 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. There's a lot of X factors to talk about on this one before we even get into discussing how they match up stylistically. So the first X factor is obviously the age and the tail of the tape. So Dober is 36 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. And Torres, 30 years old, 5'10" with a 73-inch reach. So we can see that Torres is 6 years younger than Dober, which statistically gives him about a 65% chance of winning. However, we can see that Torres is in his prime at 30 years old, which means he should be making big improvements from fight to fight. Whereas Dober, he's going to be 37 years old in October, and as a result, you would expect Dober to be getting worse from fight to fight. On top of that, Dober's had over 40 pro fights, so he's got a hell of a lot of miles on the clock. And one of the reasons why Dober is in this co-main event is because of how exciting his fighting style is. Unfortunately, that comes at a cost, and the cost is he has taken tons of damage in his career. We love Dober, but we love him because of how entertaining he is to watch and how many wars he's been in over the years. So Dober, even though 36 isn't like crazy old, 40 pro fights, tons of wars, knocked out, rocked, wobbled, dropped a bunch of times. Dober would be one of those fighters at 36 that I would be looking towards. I would think this guy could start to decline very, very rapidly. He's got a lot of miles on the clock. And so this is an interesting fight. It's kind of new school versus old school. The other X factor to consider is the size difference between these two. Now, on the tail of the tape to the naked eye, it doesn't look like much of a size difference. Dober's only 2 inches shorter, and Torres has only got a 3-inch reach advantage. So it's not like a huge size difference between these two on paper. But I think we could see a more profound size difference when we see them stood face to face at the weigh-ins. Because when you look at Manuel Torres, he just looks like a very big, powerful, physically imposing lightweight. Whereas Dober is a lot smaller and more compact. So sometimes you look at the tail of the tape and it looks like the size difference is going to be very big in terms of the numbers. But then when you see them face off at the ceremonial weigh-ins, the size difference doesn't look anywhere near as bad as you thought it would. Other times you look at the size difference on paper and they look about the same size. And then when you see them at the ceremonial weigh-in, there's actually a decent size difference between the two. I think that might be the case with this fight. So if you're going to bet this fight, or if you're going to bet Drew Dober, I should say, it's not really a big deal if you want to bet Torres, because being bigger than Dober is an advantage. But if you want to bet Dober, you might want to wait for the weigh-ins this weekend just to be sure you're happy with your bet, because I do think Torres could be a lot bigger than him face-to-face. irrespective of what the height and reach stats say. And so the other X factor to talk about is that this fight is taking place in Mexico City, so Manuel Torres will have home advantage on his side. Now, when you look at a guy like Brandon Moreno, the home advantage is very clear-cut. We know that he's got experience at fighting in Mexico City before, Erceg doesn't, and he's got the crowd behind him this weekend. I'm not sure that this fight being in Mexico City will be an advantage for Manuel Torres. Let me explain why. So there's no doubt that when these two boys walk out on Saturday night, the crowd are going to be right behind Manuel Torres. And if it's a close competitive fight, the crowd could influence the judges. If the fight gets tough for Torres, if he gets tired, if he gets hurt, perhaps the crowd can lift him into pulling through a tough position or situation and coming out stronger the other side. But Manuel Torres does fit the profile of someone that could potentially have a very bad gas tank. And we don't know if he does or not, because he's so deadly that his fights don't generally last long enough for us to see what his gas tank is like. So if we look at his record, he's had 13 pro fights, and we can see the vast majority of them have ended in round 1. You got to go all the way back to 2018 to see the last time this guy went past round 1. So he hasn't been past round 1 in 7 years. And it's completely pointless looking at that fight, because even if Torres gassed out in 1 minute back in 2018, it doesn't tell us about how he's going to look in 2025, because he could have improved so much since then. Who knows what his training was like or what his diet was like back in 2018. He could be a cardio machine now for all we know. So there's two ways to look at this. You can look at this and you can say, you know, Mexicans are well known for having very good cardio. And, you know, perhaps, you know, we can't write Torres off just because he's inexperienced. Mexicans generally do have very good cardio, but Mexicans also don't generally have big power. So Torres is a little bit of an outlier. When you think about your stereotypical Mexican fighter, even the flashy strikers like a Yair Rodriguez, typically speaking, they don't have crazy, true, legit one-shot power like Torres. They tend to break you down with volume and technique. And so every week in these breakdown videos, we talk about the trade-off between power and physicality and cardio, right? It's very, very hard, or it's very rare that you'll find a guy that's very powerful and physically imposing like Torres and have great cardio. Usually you have one or the other. And when you get a fighter that has both, when you have a fighter that's very physically imposing, very powerful and has great cardio, they are generally championship material, because it's so rare to get the two. So when you look at a guy like Manuel Torres that has crazy power in his hands, crazy abnormal power, the kind of power that when he lands clean and hard on someone, you can literally see a look in their face like, oh my god, I can't fucking believe you hit me that hard. When you get a guy like Torres that has that kind of raw power that you just can't teach, you either have it or you don't, you're either Dan Henderson or you're not, generally their cardio is bad. So that's something to keep in mind, because Torres doesn't have any experience really going outside the first round, which means he doesn't know how to pace himself past the first round. You can't train for that in a gym. Dober's tough as nails. Yes, he gets rocked, wobbled, dropped a lot, but he's very difficult to put away. How often have we seen Dober badly hurt in fights, knocked down on the brink of being finished, but he survives, weathers the storm, comes back into the fight and finds a way to win? We've seen Dober do that so many times over the years. And with Torres not having much experience going past round 1, if he doesn't knock Dober out in round 1, which he could, because like I say, Dober does get dinged a lot, but if he doesn't, I would be concerned for Torres in the second and third round of this fight, because he just doesn't have experience going past round 1. So to go up against Dober, which is a big step up in competition, at high altitude, for potentially the first time you've gone past round 1 in 7 years. It's going to be fucking difficult for Torres. Maybe he can pull it off, but the trends, the logic, the probabilities are not in his favour. And on top of that, where we talk about many of these Mexicans having an advantage with this card taking place in a high altitude climate, Drew Dober has trained for a long time in Denver, Colorado at a high altitude climate. So the likelihood is Dober has more experience than Torres fighting in a high altitude climate, or at least equal the experience that Torres has got. So that's not really an advantage for the Mexican in this matchup. So there's a lot of X factors to consider, and it's a very interesting fight. Another great one for live betting, because again, we know Torres will pose a significant threat to Dober in the first round, but past round 1, we don't know how he's going to look. He could look amazing. He could be a cardio machine. He could put it on Dober for 3 rounds. But whichever way you go betting this, you're going to be taking a big gamble. So, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, we don't really know how they match up when it comes to grappling, because we've not really seen any of Torres' grappling because all of his fights end too quick. He was on the ground a little bit in the Bahamondes fight, but not enough for us to really learn anything. In fact, he was on the ground a little bit against Duncan too, but not really enough for us to learn anything. And so we know a lot about Dober's ground game. We know his takedown offense is very bad. We know he's very weak off his back. But with both these guys predominantly being strikers, I can't imagine their grappling is going to matter a whole lot in this fight. I think this is mostly going to be a stand-up fight. If it stays standing, both of them do have true legit knockout power. With Torres' size, he's very dangerous. I would say Torres is the more powerful out of the two, but it doesn't matter. Dober can still crack. And even though Dober might be declining, power is the last thing to go. So, in terms of volume, I would give Dober a big advantage. He can fight at a high pace for 3 rounds, no problem. Torres, even in round 1, is more of a single shot striker. Doesn't really throw a whole lot of volume. He loads up on one big singular shot at a time. And with Dober, I would also say he's a lot better defensively. He does get dinged a lot for sure. He does get rocked a lot for sure. But that's because he's so aggressive that he draws his opponents into exchanges, and he bets on his chin against theirs, and sometimes he wins and sometimes he loses. But in terms of his footwork and his head movement and his striking defense, it is better than Manuel Torres. If you guys remember, we actually bet on Ignacio Bahamondes to beat Manuel Torres in his last fight. And the main reason why we bet on Bahamondes to beat him was because of how bad Manuel Torres' striking defense is. Doesn't move his head much, he tends to get dinged a lot. And that got exposed against Bahamondes because Bahamondes was able to capitalize and punish him for blocking punches with his face. So, if I had to lean one way or the other here, it's very difficult because of how dangerous both of them are, and how you know for a fact neither of them will want to take a backward step, and how they will both meet head on and play rock'em sock'em robots in the middle of the cage. For that reason, it's difficult to feel confident either way. It's a good one for live betting. Difficult to feel confident either way. Gun to my head, if I had to bet this fight and I had to pick a side, and fucking I got kidnapped and the kidnapper said, Chris, you have to pick one of these guys, like in Game of Thrones, to fight for your honor. And if they lose, you die. If they win, you survive. Who do you pick? Who do you pick? Your life depends on it. You have to pick one guy. I would go Dober, simply because when you make a list of all the advantages Dober has in this fight compared to Torres, I think you have to take Dober. My perspective, I have that perspective because for me, Dober is battle tested. Torres isn't. So we know they can both crack. We know they're very dangerous. We know they're there to be hit. Neither of them are particularly good defensively. So if these two do get into a war, they're both capable of hurting one another. What we've seen from Dober is that when he gets very badly hurt in fights. He's tough enough and durable enough to weather the storm, survive, and drag his opponents into deep water. We haven't seen Torres able to do that. That's why I would pick Dober over Torres with a gun to my head. But at the end of the day, both these guys are going to play rock'em sock'em robots. Only takes one shot to land for one of them to get knocked out. They both have knockout power. It's impossible to feel confident on either side here. Now, what we can feel confident about is that it's very unlikely, that this fight will go to a decision. Styles make fights, and I mean, it's a great dance partner for Torres because Dober's not going to want to take a backward step. Neither's Torres. They both get rocked, wobbled, dropped a lot. They're both there to be hit. Someone's getting knocked out in this fight. Unfortunately, the odds reflect that. I don't actually hate the under 1.5 rounds. The odds are too steep for me to bet that, but I wouldn't be betting on anything over related in this fight. I don't think this fight lasts very long at all. The only prop I would consider would be Dober by knockout or TKO, but the odds are absolutely terrible, and in percentage terms, they're not a whole lot better than just betting Dober straight. They're only like 20-25% better. Actually, they're not. Well, it depends. A big odd spread, right? Anywhere from 2.6 to 2.3. So anywhere from like a 20% to like a 50% increase. But I would just say don't get greedy. Bet the money line odds. Don't overcomplicate things. And, you know, if you really want to bet this fight, take Dober. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Joseph Pyfer versus Kelvin Gastelum. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pyfer is one of the biggest favourites on the card. On a card with a lot of big favourites, to be fair. But Pyfer is around about a 1.30 favourite, which is going to be minus 333 for an implied probability of 77%. And Gastelum is the underdog at average odds of about 3.45, which is going to be plus 245 for an implied probability of 29%. So Gastelum is 33 years old, 5'9", with a 71.5 inch reach. Pyfer, 28 years old, 6'2", with a 75 inch reach. And so now let's think about the X factors on this one. So when I first saw that Pyfer was fighting Gastelum, I immediately rushed to check the odds because this was one of those fights that we rarely get in MMA, which I consider to be free money territory. I would be utterly amazed if Kelvin Gastelum wins this fight this weekend. It's a very, 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 very bad stylistic matchup for him, and we'll show a little bit of footage, which if you're watching on YouTube will probably be blocked for copyright reasons. We'll soon find out. But yeah, we'll show some footage on Gastelum so you can kind of see where I'm coming from, why I'm so confident on Pyfer this weekend. If you do want to watch the uncensored version of this video, you can head to my website, MMABettingTips.com, to check it out. But if you don't want to watch the uncensored version, then I hope your eyes don't get too sore looking at the blurriness. But anyway, if we consider the X factors on this fight, we can see that Pyfer is 28 years old, Gastelum is 33 years old, and we can see Gastelum is 5'9" with a 71 inch reach, while Pyfer is 6'2" with a 75 inch reach. So Pyfer, quite a significant size advantage, a little bit of a reach advantage. Obviously Gastelum is used to fighting opponents bigger than him. You know, he's basically been much smaller than every single opponent he's ever faced at middleweight. But Pyfer is obviously a big middleweight. So when we look at these two at the ceremonial weigh-ins, I would imagine the size difference between these two to be absolutely huge. So obviously Kelvin Gastelum is born in the United States, lives in Arizona, but he does have Mexican heritage. So he will have home advantage in that respect. I would imagine the Mexican fans are going to be right behind Kelvin this weekend. And we also know that one of Kelvin's biggest attributes throughout his career is that he's been an absolute cardio machine. I don't think we've ever even seen Kelvin breathing heavily. His cardio's been phenomenal throughout his entire career. We did see Pyfer slow a little bit in his first ever main event against Jack Hermanson. But what I would say is, obviously Hermanson did make him work very hard in that fight. It was his first main event, and I would expect Pyfer to have learned a lot from that. I definitely don't love Pyfer as much in this fight as I would have done if it were taking place at sea level in the apex or something like that, because sometimes when guys fight at high altitude for the first time, they can kind of freak out and the wheels come off and they look terrible. That could happen to Pyfer, which does make it risky to bet him at big favourite odds. But having said that, Pyfer does have one big ace in the hole, an ace up his sleeve. I'm trying to think of all the analogies. Pyfer does have an ace up his sleeve, which he can fall back on at any point if he gets into trouble in this fight, which is his grappling. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, Kelvin Gastelum fights at a very high pace. Good boxing, doesn't throw too many kicks, but he really puts it on you for 3 rounds. And obviously, he's more than capable of outworking and outstriking Pyfer in a 3-round fight. Pyfer has a lot more raw power, whereas Gastelum tends to be more of a volume striker. But if this fight stays standing, Gastelum really gets in his face, really makes him work. You could see Pyfer struggling with a high altitude and Gastelum causing him some problems and outworking him. But obviously, throughout Kelvin Gastelum's career, he's had this big weakness in that his takedown offense and ground game is an absolute joke. And when it comes to guys like Gastelum, it's really confusing for me, because you get these fighters in their 30s who have had, over 10 fights in the UFC. With Gastelum, is probably over 20. Over 20 pro fights, 30 pro fights. And they've had this weakness that has existed in their skill set for their entire career, and they've never even improved it by 1%. Gastelum's grappling is just as bad now as it was when he competed on The Ultimate Fighter about 15 years ago. And you get these fighters like Kelvin Gastelum or like Molly McCann last weekend, who retired after being out-grappled and submitted in the first round against a debutant. You get these fighters and it's just like, I don't know what they do with their time. Leon Edwards is a great example. Leon Edwards, he's over 30 years old, former champion. He's had over 20 pro fights, trains at a great gym, athletic guy, good balance, strong guy, amazing cardio, but a strong gust of wind is enough to take him down. I just don't understand it. Like, what are you doing with your time? Why aren't you improving even 1%? And Gastelum's like that. So whenever we make these statements, we've always got to show a bit of footage just to back it up. And I'm hoping this doesn't get copyright flagged on YouTube, but it probably will. So watch the uncensored version on my website if you care enough. But what we're going to do is show you the Sean Brady versus Kelvin Gastelum fight. We will put some caveats out though, because when I make videos like this, people are terrible. They're fucking terrible for the recency bias. They're real bad, and they don't view fights with an open mind and a clear mind and think objectively about things. So when I play you footage of Kelvin Gastelum versus Sean Brady, I'm going to be pointing out specific things which highlight that Gastelum's takedown offense and ground game is an absolute joke. And I don't want to be going through, all these other fights to show you loads of other examples where Kelvin Gastelum's takedown offense and grappling is bad, because this video will turn out to be very long. So if you're one of these people that is going to watch this video and then be like, oh yeah, but bro, Brady's amazing, blah, 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 look what he did to Leon last weekend, blah, blah, blah. Usman couldn't hold Leon down, and look what Brady did to Leon, blah, 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 blah. Leon Edwards had a staph infection on his right arm in that fight, the size of Mount Kilimanjaro. There's a reason why he did a much better job of defending himself in grappling positions against Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman 2 times, and Belal Muhammad than he did against Sean Brady last weekend. Yes, Sean Brady is a good grappler. He is. But when it comes to physicality and grappling control, he's nowhere near as good as Belal Muhammad and Kamaru Usman. So what does that tell you about Leon Edwards last weekend? It tells you that staph infection, the size of Mount Everest on his right arm, had a bad impact on how he performed last weekend. And the UFC probably forced him to fight to save the card because they don't care about their fighters. They're ruthless, filthy capitalists. And so I don't feel Brady's performance against Edwards is a true reflection of reality. I think Edwards was seriously sick and seriously impaired and seriously weakened last weekend, which is why he performed so badly. So when I talk about specific positions in this fight, don't think, oh, it's because, you know, Brady Magomedov is just the best fucking grappler in the history of the welterweight division. No, Kelvin Gastelum makes tons of mistakes in this fight. Loads of them. And Sean Brady makes tons of mistakes in this fight, absolutely loads of them, and Gastelum just doesn't make him pay. So what we're going to do is skip through these grappling positions, and then you're going to basically see why Gastelum's takedown offense and ground game is so bad, and why Pyfer is a very difficult stylistic matchup for him. So let me bring my... There we go. Okay. So we'll hit play here. So you can see he gets taken down pretty easily there, and immediately gives up his back, but he's not in the worst position because he's relatively close to the cage, and at the moment Brady's only got one hook in on the left side. So Gastelum tries to keep his right side of the cage so he can start the wall walk, but he ends up fucking it up trying to roll out of the takedown and gets his back taken. Now, this is a mistake that Gastelum has made throughout his career and makes repeatedly in this fight, and never makes an adjustment, never learns from it, never improves from it. So Sean Brady doesn't have very good back control, and the reason why he doesn't have very good back control is because his legs are very short. So he's constantly having to, you know, switch sides with the body triangle or control guys from back control where the hooks aren't that deep. So if you look at this position, Brady's hooks aren't that deep here. So if we hit play, there's a lot of space in this position for Gastelum to explode and pivot into top position, but he needs to fully commit to it. Instead, he hesitates, and even though there's tons of space in here for Gastelum to pivot because Brady's legs aren't long enough to dig deep hooks, he kind of just lies there and allows Brady to just hold on to his back. Then, after some hesitation, Brady goes to the body triangle, and he's now in a much worse position. So now, it's very difficult for Gastelum to escape this position. When Brady first took his back, and he's got those 10 seconds where those weak hooks are in play, that's Gastelum's opportunity to explode into top position, because Brady doesn't have a whole lot from that position, but he hesitates and now gives Brady full back control. So we skip through, and this is a mistake you'll see him make over and over throughout his career. So remember what we said, Brady has short legs, so his back control is not very good, his body triangle is never that tight, and you see it here. After a little bit of movement from Gastelum, Brady's forced to open up the body triangle to try and switch sides, and that's where Gastelum scrambles out of that position and gets back up to his feet. But remember, the reason why Brady's back control isn't good is because his legs are short. So he finds it very difficult to control guys from back position. When you look at Pyfer and you look at Brady, there's obviously a big size difference. Brady is only 5'10". Pyfer is 6'2". So Pyfer's going to have much longer legs. He's a much bigger man than Brady. He's going to have much better grappling control than someone like Sean Brady. So if we skip through, they're back up to their feet. And we skip through, and we can see here, Gastelum gives up another cheap takedown. And he goes down so easily. You touch his legs and he falls over. So then he gives up his back again. Brady keeps dragging him back down. We're just going to skip through. We don't want the breakdown to be super long. So Brady eventually gets on his back again. And you can see here again, same position. These hooks are very loose. Like, look at how much space is in there. Gastelum should be... Well, there's only 16 seconds left to go in the round, right? But you've got an opportunity to I mean, look at how much daylight is underneath the knees of Brady. You've got an opportunity to explode in the top position, or at least try to explode in the top position, and end the round in a dominant position, end the round on top of Brady. But Gastelum just lays there doing absolutely nothing, and the round ticks down. Now if we go into round 2, again, we're only focusing on the grappling. Brady, again, Gastelum literally, Brady doesn't even take him down here. Gastelum jumps to the ground. I mean, look at this in slow-mo. He literally leaps to the ground. He, like, jumps backwards. It's like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? And then just basically, gets taken down. 4 minutes, 30 seconds left to go in round 2. And just lays on his back, like Leon Edwards last week, doing absolutely nothing. Just letting Brady completely dominate him from top position, doing whatever he wants. Total domination. And you've got to remember, guys, Brady is a very good grappler. I'm not saying he isn't, but he's 5'10". Joe Pyfer is 6'2". Far bigger, far stronger, far more physically imposing man. And again, right at the end of the round, gets his back taken. Loosey-goosey hooks. A lot of daylight in there, but we'll skip through. We'll go to round 3. Round 3. Again, Gastelum practically leaps to the ground. Shocking. He like flies to the ground. Brady does whatever he wants to him from top position, gets the Kimura. So, this is one of those fights where even though the high altitude, the high output, the striking of Gastelum could potentially cause Pyfer a problem, if at any point in this fight Pyfer runs into trouble, he should easily be able to get Gastelum to the ground and absolutely dominate him on the ground. Because even though Brady is a good grappler, the size and the strength and the physicality of Pyfer is so much greater than what Brady's bringing to the table. It will be very, very difficult for Gastelum to work out of bad positions on the ground when he's looked as bad on the ground as he did against Brady for his entire career. And you can obviously go watch his fights that have had a lot of grappling in them. Or you go watch the Chris Weidman fight. It's a good example. And you can kind of see for yourself how bad this guy is on the ground. So, yeah, I think Pyfer is very, 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 very likely to win this weekend. Obviously, the issue with Pyfer is that he's quite a steep favourite. I don't love the idea of betting Pyfer, a big favourite odds in a high altitude climate against a guy that's a cardio machine that has, home advantage on his side, I guess, with that Mexican heritage. But I'd be very, very, very surprised if Pyfer were to lose this weekend. And I am trying to consider a parlay partner for Pyfer. I haven't found anyone yet, but I'm thinking about a parlay partner for him. I don't love any of the big favourites enough to bet him yet. I didn't like Godinez as much as I thought I would, even though I still think she wins. She's a little bit like Moreno in that she does have bad fight IQ. A little bit inconsistent. Doesn't do a great job of putting her stamp on rounds. But maybe we'll find a parlay partner for Pyfer. But it's a terrible stylistic matchup for Gastelum due to his issues on the ground. So if we then take a look at the over-under, where are we? So if we go, there we go. So if we take a look at the over-under. So the over-under is basically in the even money odds range. And I can see the logic behind that because there's ways in which you could see this fight go into a decision, right? Because Gastelum is very tough. He's very durable. It won't be easy to finish him. And Gastelum isn't really a finisher. He's more of a volume striker. Yes, he's got the odd knockout here and there. Anyone in the UFC that's had as many fights as Gastelum in the UFC is going to have the odd knockout. But for the most part, Gastelum is a volume striker, volume puncher. It's not going to be easy for Gastelum to finish Pyfer. On the other side, it's not going to be easy for Gastelum. It's not going to be easy for Pyfer to finish Gastelum because of how tough Gastelum is. However, with how bad Gastelum's submission defense is, and we've seen that in the Weidman fight and the Brady fight, Pyfer could put him in a bad position on the ground where he's not able to defend himself and he could get a submission. On top of that, Pyfer could struggle very, very badly with the high altitude climate. And if Gastelum could take him into the third round, maybe gets a late stoppage, maybe just overwhelms him on the feet and Pyfer's too tired to defend himself. Could happen. And so because of that, I don't have a strong feeling either way on the over-under. So I won't be betting it. Now, in terms of the prop bets on this fight, Pyfer by decision, the odds are terrible. Pyfer by submission, the odds aren't great. So yeah, I don't really like the props. They're not for me. But I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now, let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Raul Rosas Jr. versus Vince Morales. So, if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Raul Rosas Jr. is the favourite at average odds of about 1.21, which is going to be minus 476 for an implied probability of 43%. If we take a look at the odds on Vince Morales, he's around an average of 4.60, which is going to be plus 360 for an implied probability of 22%. So Raul Rosas Jr. is 20 years old, 5'9", with a 67-inch reach. And Vince Morales, 34 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach. So both guys are about the same size. There's obviously a big age gap between the two. 14 years, and statistically we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 14-year age gap in a fight. However, I don't feel the age stat is relevant to this fight, and I actually feel that the age of these two favours Morales in this matchup. Why do I say that? Well, stats are only useful when they're interpreted correctly, and what those age stats are representing is when you get these young hungry bulls fighting these old declining fighters. The young hungry bull, the fresher, more athletic guy, the more motivated guy, you know, they've got advantages physically and sometimes mentally over these old beat up veterans, right? That's what that age stat is representing. But 20 years old is very, very young to be in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Raul Rosas Jr. is very inexperienced. And 34 years old isn't crazy old in the UFC. So, you know, this isn't a situation where you've got a 14-year age gap because a 30-year-old in his prime is fighting a 44-year-old. This is a situation where a guy kind of in his prime is fighting a guy who's very young and very inexperienced. And so I actually feel that the 14-year age gap in this matchup favours Morales. Now, the other X factor that we're considering on every matchup is home advantage and the impact that the high altitude climate could have on either of these two. Now, when it comes to home advantage, I'm not sure about this one because I believe, I mean, we know for sure with Raul Rosas Jr. because here he is in the Mexican colours and the sombrero, but I believe Morales is also a Mexican American. So will the Raul Rosas Jr. have home advantage for this fight? I'm not so sure. He's obviously the biggest star. You know, he's more popular. There's no doubt about that. But will the crowd show Vince Morales some love too? Pretty sure they both have Mexican heritage. I know Raul Rosas Jr. is born in New Mexico, but I believe Morales has Mexican heritage too. So I'm not sure. You'd think the crowd would favour Raul Rosas Jr., but I'm not sure. I'm not too sure. Anyway, this is a very, 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 very interesting fight. And with fights like this, we want to keep the odds in mind the whole time we're analysing a matchup like this. Because with the average odds on Raul Rosas Jr. being 1.21, which is minus 476 for an implied probability of 83%, what these odds are basically telling you with this probability is that in the eyes of the betting market, a 20-year-old inexperienced fighter with only 11 pro fights, a 20-year-old cage fighter, is going to beat a tough, well-rounded veteran at high altitude on a big UFC event 83% of the time. That's what those odds are saying. So to get any value on Raul Rosas Jr. in that situation or that kind of scenario, you got to give Raul Rosas Jr. like a 85, 86, 87, 88, 90% chance of winning this fight, which to me is absurd. If there are any fighters on this card who you ask me who is unbettable this weekend, I would say Raul Rosas Jr. At these odds, it's just absurd to bet him. But if we take a look at the odds on Vince Morales, he becomes very tempting. So his odds are around 4.50, which is plus 350 for an implied probability of 22%. This fight, whilst not identical, does have a lot of similarities to when Raul Rosas Jr. fought Christian Rodriguez in his second fight in the UFC. Because there's a lot of similarities between Rodriguez and Morales. They're both very tough. They're both very durable. They both fight at a high pace on the feet. They're both cardio machines. And they're both reasonably capable grapplers. They both also have a tendency to give up a lot of takedowns, but are quite scrambly, quite good at working their way back to their feet, and they have quite a dangerous submission game. So, when you look at how badly Raul Rosas Jr. struggled against Christian Rodriguez, you have to consider the reason why he struggled against Christian Rodriguez is because he basically burned himself out trying to take Rodriguez down and control him, and Rodriguez kept creating scrambles on the ground, working his way back up to his feet to the point where Raul Rosas Jr. basically gassed himself out trying to grapple, right? And that fight was at sea level. That fight was in Miami, Florida. Now, yes, since then Raul Rosas Jr. has become more experienced. He will have become better at pacing himself. But this fight is at high altitude. And so, if Raul Rosas Jr. gassed himself out trying to out-grapple Christian Rodriguez at sea level, in my opinion, there's quite a good chance that he'll run into big problems against Vince Morales. Like big problems. Morales is aggressive on the feet, tough as nails, good submission defense. He's aggressive on the ground. And if he can make Raul Rosas Jr. work hard for takedowns, keep scrambling back up to his feet, I think this could be one of those fights where Raul Rosas Jr. might get big brothered. So I'm strongly considering a bet on Morales. And this is not me sat here saying I think Morales is the fighter who's most likely to win. That's not the case. If Morales was most likely to win, he wouldn't be, what were the odds? 4.7, something like that, 4.5. We'll put 4.5 in, right? If Morales was the favourite to win this fight, he wouldn't be a 4.5 underdog. Because odds are never that inaccurate. Fighters like this in this odds range, they win all the time. But with all the information we have going into the fight, they're never the most likely to win. It's just the chaos and the randomness of MMA means that they do win. But the key to making money on bets in this odds range is identifying when guys like Morales, who are less likely to win, have a pretty good fucking shot. And have a shot that's a lot better than 22%. If I were capping this fight personally, I feel it's more than reasonable to give Morales a 30% chance of winning this fight at minimum, based on the fact that Raul Rosas Jr. struggled very bad against Christian Rodriguez. You could even get to 40%. And depending on how you cap it, 30% would give you an 8% margin over the bookie. And 40% would obviously give you an 18% margin over the bookie. I don't see how you could cap Morales worse than what his odds are. I don't see how you could be like, oh, I only give this guy a fucking 10% chance of winning. based on what happened in the Rodriguez fight. So Morales is a very, 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 very interesting one to me. Now, as we can see, his odds are improving. So there's no rush for me to go out and bet him straight away. His odds are still getting better. And I haven't officially locked this bet in on my website or on the Discord yet. But I'm strongly considering it, because it will not be easy for a 20-year-old, inexperienced wet blanket to beat a tough, well-rounded fighter like Vince Morales if Morales can drag him into a war. It's a very, very interesting fight. Super, super, super interesting. I mean, Morales almost submitted Elijah Smith in his last fight in that second round, and I think Elijah Smith is better than Raul Rosas Jr. He might not have the hype behind him, but I think he's a better fighter. So there we go. In terms of the over-under on this one, it is tricky because they are both very tough, both very well-rounded. If the fight plays out the most likely way, where Raul Rosas Jr. just kind of takes Morales down, wet blankets him, then I think the fight will go to a decision. Because I don't think Raul Rosas Jr. is good enough to submit Vince Morales. Morales' submission defense is too good. I don't think Rosas Jr. is going to be able to put him away. If the fight doesn't go to a decision, I think it will be because Raul Rosas Jr. is basically faded and caved under the pressure, the high altitude. He's been big brothered, and he's kind of been worn down and stopped by Morales. So I think if you want to bet this fight, you're just better off taking Morales money line. It is a gamble, but the odds are generous in my opinion on this one. Now, in terms of the props, I would be looking at things like Morales to win in round 3. Yes, the odds... yes, it's not that likely it will happen, but you don't have to hit many winners in this odds range to earn a long-term profit. You know, you can have a terrible win rate and still make a profit. I do think it's possible Raul Rosas Jr. runs into a lot of trouble in the second half of this fight if Morales really makes him work hard for takedowns. And failing that, you know, is there any point in getting really cute with the props? Now, round 3 Morales is good, and you know, Morales money line's pretty good as well, I think. So, yeah, hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be David Martinez, the Black Spartan. I don't know why he calls himself the Black Spartan, because he's not black, but maybe we'll find out during fight week. He's fighting Simon Oliveira. Simon spelt kind of like salmon, but it's not salmon, it's Simon. He doesn't call himself the Black Salmon or the Black Fish or anything. He's just Simon. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that he is the underdog at average odds of around 4.10, which is going to be plus 310 for an implied probability of 24%. So if we take a look at the odds on Martinez, he's around an average of 1.25, which is going to be minus 400 for an implied probability of 80%. So Martinez is 26 years old, 5'6" with a 66-inch reach. Oliveira, 33 years old, 5'4" with a 66-inch reach. So both guys about the same size. There's a big gap in age of about 7 years, but in the context of this fight, I don't think it's going to mean a whole lot. Martinez is making his UFC debut, which is very nice. And obviously he's Mexican, which is also very nice because he's got home advantage. And this is probably the only fight on the main card where we're going to be talking about this. But it is present on lots of fights on the prelims. So if you want to watch my breakdowns of the prelim fights, watch this on YouTube. Check them out on my website. But basically, Martinez is Mexican. He's going to have the crowd behind him. That's good. He's also going to have more experience fighting at high altitude. That's also good. And he does have better cardio than Simon Oliveira, which again is another good thing. So Oliveira is one of these guys that we have seen slow down in his fights at sea level. So fighting a Mexican at a high altitude in Mexico, it's not ideal for Oliveira. And this is one of those fights where the UFC are being a little bit cruel with the matchmaking, a little bit sadistic with the matchmaking, and putting Oliveira in a tough spot. And we'll be talking a lot about this in other fights as well, which have got a similar sort of setup, where I think the UFC put fights like this on the card. As if you're paying a lot of money as a Mexican fan to go watch the UFC, you want to see Mexican fighters win. You want to see your guy, your team win. The UFC is in the entertainment business. They want to entertain their fans. They need Mexican fighters to win. And as a result, I think Oliveira is a bit of a lamb to the slaughter here. Now, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, there's no huge skill gaps between these two. They're both reasonably skilled. They're both reasonably well-rounded. Martinez is one of these guys that is a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. You know, blue-collar, industrious fighter, fights at a decent pace, good chin, good cardio, well-rounded, nothing special about him. But he can fight at a high pace for 3 rounds. Oliveira has got more power than Martinez, but that comes at a cost because he slows down his fights we're on. Takedown offense isn't the best. It probably won't matter because Martinez is a striker who never tries to take guys down. So this is one of those fights where Oliveira will probably just get outworked and outstruck over 3 rounds. And I think the best Oliveira can really hope for in this fight is to make it close and competitive, because he can't really match the volume and the output of Martinez. But if he makes it close and competitive, he's probably going to get robbed, and the judges will give Martinez a hometown decision anyway. So this is one of those fights where, you know, if this were in the apex, I would be saying the odds are very wide here. To be fair, the odds are wide. Skill for skill, the odds are wide. Martinez should probably not be this big of a favourite. But it's tough to see Oliveira, a guy that slows down his fights we're on, go into Mexico City, you know, beating a Mexican at high altitude. It's not likely. It isn't that likely. And so as a result, this is dog or pass because the odds are simply too steep to take Martinez. But if you do bet Oliveira, you're not putting your money in a particularly good position, in my opinion. So in terms of the over-under on this one, this fight's very likely to go to a decision. If you look at their records, you can see that there's a good amount of finishes on Martinez's record. And if you look at Oliveira's record, also a good amount of finishes. But styles make fights, and both these guys are tough, durable, and well-rounded, and neither of them are that dangerous. I think with these two, it's one of those situations where there's lots of finishes on their record because they fought a lot of low-level guys they've been able to finish. I think these are going to be two of those guys that as they face a step up in competition, you'll start to see them go to a decision more because they're not that dangerous. And we can kind of see that if we dig a bit deeper on their record. You know, you can see lots of quick finishes. And then as soon as Martinez faces a step up in competition on the Contender Series, he goes to a decision. And then if you look at Simon Oliveira, loads of quick finishes. And then as soon as he faces a step up in competition on the Contender Series and in the UFC, he goes to a decision in 2 of his last 3 fights. You can kind of see they're not as dangerous as they're facing a step up in competition. So yeah, I do think it's quite likely this one goes to decision. I'm surprised it's at underdog odds. The over 2.5 rounds is actually very interesting to me. I might take that. Haven't locked it in yet, but I'll let you know on the Discord or on the website if I make it official. It's tempting. I do think it's quite likely to go to a decision. And in terms of most likely outcomes, I think it's Martinez by decision. So if you really want to bet a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, I think the best bet out of everything I've seen on this fight is actually over 2.5 rounds. I quite like that, and I might take it myself. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Kevin Borjas. This is one of the most interesting fights on the card. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Rodriguez is the favourite at average odds of about 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. If we take a look at the odds on Borjas, he's around an average of 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Rodriguez is 25 years old, 5'6" with a 65-inch reach, and Borjas is 27 years old, 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. So we can see both guys are about the same size. Borjas has a bit of a reach advantage, it's only 3 inches, but to be fair to Borjas, he's very, very good at using that reach. So he uses his length well. Striking is very, very good. So that 3-inch reach advantage is definitely going to give him a bit of an edge in this fight. 3 inches isn't always a big deal, but when you've got a guy like Borjas that knows how to use it, it is quite a big deal. We can see both of them are about the same age. The other X factor to take into consideration on this one is that Rodriguez is Mexican, so he's going to have home advantage on his side. So with Rodriguez, obviously we know having home advantage will enable him to have the crowd behind him, which could influence the judges. But on top of that, Rodriguez is also going to be better equipped at fighting in the high altitude climate in Mexico City, because he does have great cardio and he has experience of fighting in Mexico previously. Borjas, on the other hand, has slowed down in a few of his past fights. So I do feel that Borjas is one of those fighters that could struggle with a high altitude climate quite a bit if Rodriguez can make him work hard very early. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, they are both primarily strikers. Rodriguez will look to grapple a lot in fights. Borjas won't. But this is a fight where I really think it's going to come down to Borjas' cardio and whether it holds up in that high altitude environment. So the key to victory for Rodriguez in this fight is just making Borjas work very hard early on, so that in the second half of the fight he can start to take over. Because in terms of how these two match up skill for skill and stylistically, it is a difficult fight for Ronaldo Rodriguez. So in order for him to close that skill gap, he needs to get Borjas tired. So once we talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, then you can start to understand why it's very important that Rodriguez kind of wears Borjas down a bit if he wants to win this fight. So both these guys are primarily strikers, so we'll focus on striking in a moment. And we'll first of all just break down the grappling, because that's the simplest aspect of this fight to kind of, cap and analyze and predict. So on the ground, Rodriguez has a pretty big advantage. Now, Rodriguez is one of these chaotic fighters on the ground. He's constantly trying to improve his position. He's constantly attacking with submissions, and because of this, he does give up position a lot. Borjas' takedown defense isn't very good, but he is reasonably good at defending himself on the ground. So he can be quite scrambly, can be difficult to control until you wear him down. So Rodriguez is chaotic, he gives up position a lot on the ground, but there's no doubt that if this fight goes to the ground, Rodriguez is going to have a big edge. And if Rodriguez wants to win this fight, he should focus on grappling hard early, to force Borjas to exert energy to defend the takedowns, to battle for position on the ground. And I think if Rodriguez comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, that is going to give him the best chance of winning. Because Borjas is going to be difficult to deal with for Rodriguez early. So Borjas is one of these very technical strikers. Like I say, he uses his length well. He's got good leg kicks. He's aggressive on the feet. He's got decent power as well. And he's a very good counter striker. He's got good footwork, good movement, and he's very good at just circling away from his opponents, picking them off from the outside and playing the role of matador, which is a style that could be very effective against someone like Ronaldo Rodriguez, because Rodriguez tends to be one of these guys that comes forward, takes control of the center of the octagon and applies relentless pressure to his opponents. He's constantly forcing them to engage, he walks them down, and he forces them to fight on the outside in an uncomfortable range for most fighters, because it's very difficult for most guys to fight on the back foot. The difference with Borjas is that even though he's only got 12 pro fights, he is very good at fighting on the back foot. And so Rodriguez is one of these guys, like most pressure fighters, like your Tony Fergusons, like your Nate Diaz's, even like your Drew Dobers, who's fighting on this card, who does take a lot of damage in fights, and he is bad defensively, just like the three guys I just named, because when you're constantly coming forward and pressuring your opponent, you're putting yourself in a position to be hit. So Rodriguez is reckless, he is bad defensively, and Borjas is very fast, very accurate, very technical. He's got good footwork, good movement, and he can pick Rodriguez out off from the outside and inflict a lot of damage. Now, what we have seen from Rodriguez in his UFC debut against Josh Van in his Contender Series fight is that he does slow a bit as fights wear on. I wouldn't say he's got bad cardio, but we've definitely seen him slow as fights wear on. The thing with Borjas is he doesn't have bad cardio, but he is one of these guys that will potentially fade if you make him work very hard, because he uses a lot of footwork and movement, which obviously burns through a fair bit of energy. So if we know if you make him work hard at sea level, he will slow. Obviously, if you make him work hard at high altitude in Mexico City, he's going to slow even faster. But the question for me is, can Rodriguez make Borjas work hard? Because if Rodriguez starts coming forward, applying relentless pressure, he could end up taking tons of damage, which will make it very difficult for him to continue to come forward without taking even more damage or potentially get knocked out. And if Rodriguez isn't able to use his striking to set up his takedowns, or if he chooses not to grapple, which sometimes these guys that like to stand and bang like Rodriguez do, they let their ego get the better of them, they choose to stand and bang, then I don't think Rodriguez is going to make Borjas work hard enough early on to slow down enough for Rodriguez to close the skill gap enough in the second half of the fight to be able to outstrike Rodriguez. Because even though he slowed down around the midway point of the Josh Van fight, couple things to consider. First of all, this fight was like 18 months ago now, so Borjas has likely improved a lot since then. Second of all, it was obviously Borjas' UFC debut, so octagon jitters, bright lights of the UFC, shouldn't be too harsh on him for that performance. And the third thing is that Josh Van is an amazing boxer that was able to apply relentless pressure to Borjas, but in a way where he was able to defend himself in those positions better than Rodriguez would have been able to, and also did a lot of work to Borjas' body to kind of wear him down, landed a lot of body shots, hard hooks to the body. We know Van's got great hooks to the body, great boxing to the body, so Rodriguez isn't skilled enough to do what Van did, and the way Van kind of pressured Borjas and wore him down with body shots is going to be a very big factor that contributed towards him slowing down as much as he did against Van. And if Rodriguez can't kind of do the same thing because he's not as skilled, we may not see Borjas slow down anywhere near as much, and he may have good enough cardio for 2 rounds to kind of, pick Rodriguez apart for 2 rounds, hang on for the third, take a 29-28 no sweat decision. Although, is it ever a no sweat decision in the UFC with how bad judging is? Definitely fucking not. And so that's pretty much how I see this fight. So my lean on this one is very difficult. When you look at the footage, you've got to lean Borjas because it is a tough stylistic matchup for Rodriguez. But where we've seen Borjas slow down at sea level, with this fight being at high altitude, it is going to be a difficult fight for Borjas if Rodriguez can drag him into a war. And most of Rodriguez's fights turn into a war. So I'm very split on this one. I can see how both guys are kind of in the even money odds range. Very difficult to pick a winner on this one. Initially my lean was on Rodriguez, but his striking was actually worse than I remembered. And Borjas' striking was actually a lot better than I remembered, and his cardio wasn't as bad as I thought it was before I researched it. So yeah, tricky fight. So in terms of the over-under on this one, in terms of the over-under, both guys are very tough, both guys are well-rounded. I guess it's more likely that the fight goes to a decision, but Rodriguez does have that killer instinct. So you can see 3 of Borjas' last 4 fights have gone deep. This one went past the 3rd round. These two went to a 3-round decision. Rodriguez is very aggressive. He does go for the kill, but Borjas is difficult to put away. So, yeah, I'm kind of torn on this one. Most likely outcomes for the props. Rodriguez by decision. Odds very bad. It's a great fight for live betting, this one. But a tough one for pre-fight betting. Because we don't really know how hard Rodriguez is going to be able to make Borjas work early. And that's a critical aspect in predicting the outcome of this fight. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. It would really help me a lot to get my channel grow. And if you could also hit the like button, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you make a lot of money this weekend. Have a great weekend. And I'll see you all next week for another breakdown video. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.